Francis Kuhn, CFM, IFMA Fellow, who is responsible for managing Worley-Parsons' Western United States facilities operations. He earned his facility manager designation in 1996. Before joining Worley-Parsons, Kuhn served as Vice President, Facilities and Administration for West Corp, as Director of Facilities for Angeles Corporation, and Director of Facilities and Administration for New World Entertainment. He is a 10-year past president of the San Dimas Corporate Park Property Owners Association, a past president of the International Facility Management Association Los Angeles chapter, and in 2002 and 2004 was named Professional Member of the Year. Kuhn also served on the Board of Trustees, serving as past chair of the IFMA Foundation in 2006 to 7, previously serving as Secretary, Treasurer, First Vice Chair, and Chair. He is also a past president of the Board of Directors of IFMA from 2011 to 2012. And he sits on numerous active committees and task force. This past October, Francis was named IFMA Fellow, the highest recognition an individual can attain in facilities management. Kuhn earned his bachelor's degree in 1997 from the University of California, Los Angeles. Also presenting today is Ken Burkhalter, CFM. He has 35 years experience developing large corporate projects, leading multi-site service organizations. His professional focus is strategic planning, capital project planning and implementation, and as well as change leadership. Burkhalter currently serves as a board member of the International Facility Management Association and is past president of the Los Angeles chapter. He also has a FM blog called FM and Beyond, and you can get that at fmandbeyond.com. Okay, Francis and Ken, the presentation is yours.
Welcome, everybody. This is Ken Burkhalter, and Francis and I are happy to be joining you today. And I think the next hour will be a little bit fun as well as being informative. Francis, you want to say anything?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. And I'm the one with the accent, so if you have problems telling us apart, just listen to my accent.
There you go. So today we're going to talk about, we're just going to get started pretty quickly here, but we're going to talk about trends that are ongoing in the profession. You'll recognize many of those, but we're going to talk specifically about how FMs can respond to those. But we thought we'd start with taking a look, not just at the profession, but in the world in general, and thinking about how things are changing all around us, not just in our offices. So you probably recognize that there's an ongoing shift away from management to leadership. That's pretty common as we look at business world. A lot of geopolitical changes around the world, and that never slows down. It seems like it'll continue. But one of the things that comes out of that is there are new competitors that emerge, and those new competitors have new ways of working, and sometimes that can be an opportunity or a challenge. A lot of demographic changes in the world, and this whole issue of economic power and ability to influence the globalization of business. So those affect us as well every day. One thing that you might not have realized is that China is today's demographic colossus and economic, a growing economic power. But in less than a generation, they're going to have a shrinking population. And as I'm sure most of you have heard, the office space in the U.S. is shrinking as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
Something that's very interesting about all the changes in the geographic world is that you're going to have influences from social and sports. For instance, take Brazil in 2016. Next year, this year, they're gearing up for the World Cup. 2 years after, they're gearing up for the Olympics. And how much infrastructure and how much of the international monetary flow is reversed from focusing on places like China and Europe and Africa, now going to be going to South America. So it's really important to realize and sit back and watch how the economics of your local economy is interacting with all these international influences. The last comment I'd like to add on this slide is that the U.S. office space per employee. I work for an international company. I work for an Australian engineering company, and our metric is 150 square foot per person. And the difficulty is culturally based. There are other countries internationally that will suffice with a lot less square footage, and that's what they've been introduced because they've been able to look at it over everyone else's shoulders and take best practice. The U.S. is going to be behind, anyone in North America, we're going to be behind in this because we're just used to traditional brick and mortar, and it just takes a while for us to translate into the new economy and the new technology.
I'll just kind of second that very quickly. I just, personal experience, I recently completed a 2-year project where I was in the Mideast in Doha building a project there. And over the span of that time, I developed, several relationships. Got a chance to observe how they work, and they're much more in the European model. And the much more collaborative, the smaller workspaces, that's really kind of their norm. And it is much different. It was interesting because our office there is more along the U.S. base, but we had a lot of visiting researchers moving in and out from our European sites. And that was an interesting interaction because we have a lot of discussions about the cultural issues you're talking about and how they affect the work style and in the end, the work product. So again, we'll talk more about that as we get into the presentation. We're going to start by looking at 3 what we're calling mega trends. And then we have some other issues we'll talk about as time permits on the back end. But we're going to spend the time up front looking at this issue of connectedness between people and systems, the aging of the FM profession that's leading to a pretty intense competition for talent, and then kind of the issue we've been talking about at the outset here, the changing workplace. So we'll start with this era of radical connectedness, which is actually a term that Nancy Sandquist coined, I believe, or at least popularized in some measure. Many of you may know Nancy. And this really talks to the combination of the nexus of forces and the Internet of Everything. And the nexus of forces essentially is a Gartner term that came out a couple of years ago where they're talking about parallel pathways, the mobile, the cloud, the data analytics, social, all of those kinds of things, but the degree to which those parallel pathways are playing off of each other and essentially becoming force multipliers. And then when you relate that to the Internet of Everything, where systems talk to systems, it just gets more, more integrated. And it's I was kind of shocked when I read the report that by 2020, 50 billion intelligent devices will be linked together. And as we'll see later in the presentation, that really presents a bit of a challenge to FMs at times, because we're challenged to not only build those nodal connections, but to know what's going on in them, to be able to extract data from them, interpret that, and react accordingly. And so those machines talking to machines is great, that's fine. But we as the human operators of the environment have to be able to discern what's going on and guide the process, by understanding what really matters to us, where wisdom really lies, and then creating strategies and plans around that.
And 2020 is a short 6 years away, and if you can just go back in your mind 6 years ago, where you were with your reliance on technology and your application, how much things have changed. I know I have a challenge with my children, both adult children and minor children, when I start talking to them about technology, because they know a lot more than I do. In this case, you will have to teach an old dog new tricks, because I find it increasingly difficult to keep up with it, and maybe that's the world of FM telling me something.
So as an example of that, I'm sure we're all familiar with the increasing building complexity that we deal with in the systems. This technology growth it doesn't seem to slow down, it's exponential. And for many of us, it's outpacing, kind of the point Francis was just making, it's outpacing our ability in some cases to use it effectively and efficiently. So there's there's a training dimension there. There's a think about different ways that you can take advantage of that. In some cases, that might mean that you don't do it anymore, that you begin to outsource more of that capability. Or you may choose to go the other route and bring it inside, in which case you have to be very cognizant of those issues. You have to talk about new skill sets, and you have to do a very good job of recruiting, not just the technology people, but also the building operators. We talk often in FM about the boiler room, boardroom nature of the profession, but in this case, this is an area where I think the folks who are in the figurative boiler room, their technical savvy needs to be accelerated or escalated as well, because that's becoming more and more important to them just doing their day-to-day job.
As a larger share or a larger percentage of our roles as facility managers in the built environment moves away from traditional O&M, technology helps us define how we become more uber strategic. The more time we get away from the brick and mortar applications, those menial tasks that we used to do, or we used to think we did, now that time is going to be spent on planning and strategic foresight, envisioning. I'm amazed on how a premise of hoteling has changed in the last 2-3 years to now that there are a lot of companies that are looking to on-demand space, where you used to be looking at supply-driven product deliveries. You're now looking at the same thing, but now the product is the real estate itself, and how facility managers are becoming more integrated and more essential in managing that world.
Another area where this lines up is the data, the metrics, and the data analytics, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think there's I think a lot of FMs, and I certainly have this in my background in the past, where you might be in a mid-size or even a smaller size organization, and sometimes you see a lot of these tools, and one of the big things today is business intelligence, and there's a lot of dialogue and energy behind big data and data analytics, and those are absolutely core parts of the FM business now and should be a part of the FM suite. The ability to manipulate and understand and use data and analyze data and make decisions based on data so that you can find those points of wisdom that allow FM to have a real impact on the business of the business. So having that capability and demonstrating that intelligence and data agility are really important, more so today in FM than I think they've ever been before. And that trend is not going to slow down. That's going to get deeper and deeper, I believe, as time goes on. But going back to my opening comment about folks who might not be in an organization that has the resources to have a large business intelligence or data suite. I'm not in a small organization now, but we made a decision, kind of a strategic decision, not to outsource it in that way. We decided to rather invest in our people, and we, quite frankly, put our folks through a set of statistical courses. We started at the very basics, and over a period of 3 to 4 years, we built that capability up, even down to our mailroom staff, as an example. And I could go to virtually every function in our organization. And our line folks develop our metrics. They do the data acquisition, they do the tracking, they do the analytics, they do the reporting, and the management staff looks at that a couple of times a month, and we get into a deeper analysis and things. But we actually use that information on an ongoing basis to manage our business. And the point I'm making here is it's homegrown. We didn't go out and buy a big sophisticated system. We invested a lot less in training and empowering our staff, and it's paid dividends for us in a number of areas.
I think the future of data management and analysis is not only a core function, but is the core function of FM going forward. Of course, things will change in the next 2 or 3 years. The other thing that is very important is how you apply the data, you know, the agility, how you collect the data, how you use it, how you format it. There's still that issue that we, as facility managers, sometimes do not have access to the C-suite. We got to keep pushing on that. There's many of the executives that I've been able to at least open their eyes to the importance of facility management. They've not turned them around, because most of the time us in facility manager have other responsibilities, including, you know, safety and security, but also we're managing the second largest physical asset of a company, which is its real estate or its property, and how we effectively operate those issues or those assets with our most important asset, the individual, the human factor. It's easier for someone in the C-suite now to see that alignment. Rather, 4 or 5 years ago, we were just talking straight numbers, how much square footage, where the location was, what we were paying per square foot. Now, the trend is of most successful executives that I interact with, they have the vision. They can see how important it is for us to manage all this data that we have, to bring out not only good brick and mortar products, but also those collaborative centers, the networking centers, all those sort of things.
So kind of continuing on that theme, new workers coming in, and this is one that will show up in a couple of different times, but you know, new workers coming in, they're younger, they have different skill sets, and they're more technology friendly or cognizant, generally speaking. So what does FM do about that? Well, you know, streamlining work so that people really can work remotely. Sometimes that means new systems. It most definitely means new policies, entitlement policies. That even gets into space issues and kind of this issue of the metric change from 300 to 100 where we're headed. So the FM's job here, and this goes back to what Francis was just saying about data, is really understand what you're doing because you understand why you're doing it. And the why comes from understanding the data. And, you know, evidence-based design, evidence-based decisions. Frank Becker, who's a professor at Cornell at the Workplace Strategy Summit, I think it was November of 2012, the first one, he made a statement in that one of his presentations that has never left me, and what he said was, and he was talking about research, and as opposed to the way a lot of people think they do research, and his comment was, and he was referencing opinion surveys, and his comment was, what you think that you know about something is not research. Show me the data. And from his perspective, the data is gathered by actual observing or data collection of actual data points, not personal, not so much kind of the personal opinion. Now, you know, when it comes to customer service satisfaction surveys, that's obviously the foundation there, but he was speaking more to the kind of the nitty-gritty details of operations.
And even though there's been a shift in demographics, you know, with the next gens, the Ys, the baby boomers, those yet to come, there's sub-markets. So in our analysis of data, there's no one singular template for any specific industry. I think we plagiarize a little, we borrow a little bit, we innovate, and we learn from each other in sessions like these where we're sharing data and we're sharing knowledge and we're sharing information, that we can take these things and apply them to our particular issues in work areas. I focus right now managing real estate portfolios because we are an on-demand service provider as facility managers in my firm. You know, we have a project come on, a contract signed, we have to have space. We just can't have space sitting in reserve. We want to make sure that we have a core site of space available, But then on the outside, we have these flexible spaces, and of course, that's management of leases, dates, expiries. So you got to take the particular information that you have with your culture and mold that into the brick and mortar, if that's what you need, or a combination or a hybrid of that.
So what we've been talking about here in general is leading to the workplace issue, where the space is shrinking and the culture is changing as well as the size of the space. And those two interact on each other. Space and culture interact in pretty dynamic ways on each other. So you can see on the graph here, as you get fewer offices, you have more remote working. That seems pretty obvious. More choice, that seems pretty obvious. Technology is an enabler in this whole move. You get more virtual like we are today, and the whole trend now is towards more collaborative space, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this idea of collaboration is really a central theme to the whole shift that is occurring. But collaboration has different meanings to different people or to different organizations. And it's really important that you understand what collaboration should mean for your organization, your operation. And it's really important, I think, that you understand what your real need is, and that you customize your solution if you're changing your workspace. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later too.
And I think it's more than just the bottom line that the shrinking workplace is being pushed along with. It's also that drive to recruit the best talent. And so the chart up here shows the shrinkage of the square footage, but as we learn to do more and more things away from a physical asset, that's going to really draw the new generation into facility management. One of the things, I'm not really sure where this comment really falls within this presentation, but 75% of us who are gray hairs in 5 years will be out of facility management in an active role. What do we have to do to develop and generate and recruit our successors, the people who are going to be following us? How do we share that information? How do we make the workspace work for them and their peers in whatever corporate environment that they're in? There's going to be a lot of opportunities to train and share knowledge, and part of that is with the degree programs. One of the amazing facts that, with my experience with the foundation, is that a country the size of the Netherlands, less than 20 million people, have anywhere from 4,500 to 6,000 students enrolled in facility management courses. Whereas in North America, with a population of 380 million, we have less than 1,000. Something has to be done and something has to be recognized. Because the people, if you're here now in North America and this is your work environment, you're going to be seeing an influx of foreign educated facility managers, highly competent, with great ideas, which are going to push the envelope for things that we're not even envisioning right now. But it's something for us to think about, because as a facility manager, you owe it back to this profession to develop someone to follow you. Share that information. And the fact that you're on this call is just proving that you are interested in doing that and you are focusing on that.
That's actually a really interesting point. In fact, there is recent survey work. I can't remember exactly where I read this, but probably in the journal or some publication like that. But the number of companies that are having to now recruit their talent globally is very high. I mean, it's north of 70% of top-tier companies are recruiting talent globally, not just for global positions, but for U.S. positions as well. So, there's this whole talent thing does have an impact to the officing and the cultural environment. And that's only, again, that's another trend that's just going to continue to deepen. So this slide actually comes from a presentation that the LA chapter had a few months ago, where one of the architectural firms, HOK, was talking about this workplace trend issue. And I put this in the deck primarily because of what's over on the left-hand side of the slide. What are the trends in piece? For some reason my voice is laughing, but if you look in the middle there, you've got the human factors piece and the branding piece, the new ways of working, and those are really big drivers. But if you look and you see where the number one is, it's cost. And that's both because of the real estate implication of the workplace change. It's the cost of deploying these new work styles, new technologies. It also goes to the cost of recruiting the new talent piece. So the interesting thing here that I take away is that traditionally the CRE role has been the business driver behind workplace change, but that's no longer the case. And the traditional CRE perspective has been cost of real estate, cost of projects, et cetera. But now more and more, it's the drivers are, the change management, the IT tools, the HR side. In fact, we're all very familiar with the FM IT merge as technology and FM get more and more integrated. But I would argue that in many ways, the HR FM merge is becoming just as important and will be the equal over time, in a pretty short time, I think. But if you look at that, these are the trends in the background that are really driving the move. Now, how that gets executed, has to be customized and individualized to each organization and each project per se. There's a couple of, go back to that slide for a minute. There's a couple of points I think I would make here too, and that is that this is not necessarily a new or recent phenomena. In fact, if you go back to you can go back to some organizations into the 1950s and find this discussion. There's a researcher, Tom Allen, at MIT, who in 1977 did some fairly seminal research around this issue, and particularly he was interested in the relationship between the distance people are away from each other, the random interactions that occur as a result of distance, and the impact those interactions have on business. And one of the key findings of his research was that 50 meters, kind of at the outside, but 30 meters is really the fulcrum point where the number and the quality, the business quality of personal interactions really tip. And if you get more than 30 and certainly more than 50 meters away, the quality of those interactions really begins to tail off pretty quickly. And that's an important, so a couple of things there. You can see that the research work that's been going on in the background is not new at all. It goes back literally half a century or more. Business is now kind of maturing to the point in one sense that it's beginning to align with what the research has shown for some time, and that alignment is beginning to accelerate. But again, it's important that you understand what's right for you. So to the next slide, and I picked out just one example. There actually, if you look at current literature, there's already a bit of a pushback occurring against what's the last couple of years has been kind of the prevalent design trend towards these wide open, take the walls down, open the space up, almost pure collaborative space. And one of the things that's really interesting to me, Francis, is that a lot of the pushback, not an insignificant amount of the pushback, is coming from younger generation workers. And I would have thought that not to be the case, but it is. And what they're even saying is, especially in knowledge work environments, we need quiet in order to do the cognitive heads down concentration work. And we just don't get that when we're in the middle of this big hub. So again, in my mind, that goes to evidence-based. You know, understand the design trend, and it certainly has a lot of benefits to it, but you have to personalize that, and the way you personalize it is by understanding the real data and what your real needs are.
When you're looking at trends, you're looking at surveys and observations. I think the observations are probably more paramount, and they carry more critical weight. Things like safety, health, environment. I mean, we'll probably get into sustainability and how it fits into the workplace, but there are so many different examples of doing things differently, of trying to make collaborative workspace. I work for an Australian company. We're based in Sydney. The CEO in Sydney has an office that's smaller than some of the cubicles that we provide for our engineers. I would say he's in the bottom 20% of size of his office, and most of the time he's out on the work floor. But there have been other attempts, and they've been, you know, well thought out and well intended, but they just didn't fly. I mean, have a law firm and you want to use daylighting, you want to use that as a recruitment tool. You want to satisfy your present employees, keep them for retention. So you do all this work, and you place all the interior offices are in the core of the building, and everyone can share in daylight, and all of a sudden they open the keys, or open the door, here are the keys. The executives stand there looking at each other going, where am I supposed to go? Because no one has really observed how they work. You know, they've done the surveys, and of course people are going to put in the right answers or what they think are the right answers on a survey. So it's really getting to know the staff and the people and what their intent is. Yeah, it's driven by business needs, but it's also driven by those human factors, those things, those itchy things that get underneath your saddle, is what can you do to satisfy those roles. So it's a matter of cost, of making sure that we do address those things, and I think over time, the cost that we spend up front now will become more traditional in the 5-10 years in the future. At that time, we'll be looking at some other scenarios that we'll have to address. But the bottom line is, I don't know how to put it in words, is you've got to sell, you've got to have that executive team member that supports you. You have the resources, you have the knowledge. In 99% of the cases, you know what needs to be done intuitively. You don't have to go do a study. You know what needs to be done. It's a matter of selling that concept to the executive staff and getting them to buy on. Once we get that buy-on, then things go a lot smoother.
And I think, kind of going back to one of the earlier points too, is to what you're speaking of, it's not always FM that's leading the charge these days. In fact, CBRE did a survey, and they compared 2009 to 2013. And in 2009, FM CRE was leading 50%, 56% of the workplace change initiatives. And in 2013, that was down to 23%. Now, okay, so who picked it up? Well, about half of the increase was picked up by executive leadership, exactly what you're talking about. And then HR picked up a little bit, but about another big chunk of it was by others, not really quantifiable as any one part of an organization. And what that indicates to me is that the interest in this topic is really widespread, and it's a point of focus in the C-suite where the executives live. All right. So for FMs, the takeaway from that is that I think now more than ever, it's really important that we build strategic relationships very broadly across the organization. Our ability to influence the direction of our organizations is directly proportional to the quality of our relationships with organizational leaders. That's always been true, but those that we have to have an external interest in, I think that field is larger than it used to be and growing larger. And you cannot necessarily predict where it is, because leadership, much as it did with sustainability, leadership in this area might come from many different areas inside your organization.
You know what has to be done. You have the knowledge. You know the resources that you have available, your design team, your architectural team, your contracting team. The drive to impact the bottom line is what's, in a lot of cases, driving the ratio of how much square footage an individual should have. It's well intended, but a lot of times it's not thought through on some of the secondary trends, the secondary items. For instance, you could have a facility of 90,000 square feet, have 340 people in it, but you want to drive that cost down per square foot. You want to drive how many square feet are available to each individual. So you come up with the small hoteling scenarios, you come up with the collaborative spaces, you reduce footprints in a lot of areas, and then in that same scale, that same shell of a building that you have 90,000, you now push your population to 550 to 600. Well, good. You got a pat on the back from the executives. You've now got it down to 150 square foot per person, exactly which was our target. Unfortunately, no one considered how much parking was available and what was the transportation to and from the work site. So in effect, you have a 90,000 square foot facility with 550 seats, but only half of them can be occupied because you don't have enough parking or transportation access. There's the issues with amenities. Why do we need to be near a location where there's a hotel, shopping, X, Y, Z? A lot of times those secondary issues are pushed aside. And I think we just need to be astute enough to make sure that when they take a snapshot of where we are and they diagram where they want us to be, that we really vet this out well. I've seen too many facility managers get excited about new projects and then end up in a tremendous quagmire of issues because they just weren't thought out.
So we've covered the three big trends, the technology and radical connectedness, the competition for talent, and we spent a fair amount of time on the workplace. We have just a few minutes left before we get into Q&A, so we're going to try to cover probably not all of these, but we'll hit the highlights on what we call secondary trends, at least for the purposes of this presentation. And I'm not sure anybody's thought of sustainability yet as a secondary trend. We just put it in here because it wasn't part of the big three. And I think the reason for that is that, back in 2010, during the 2010 Future Trends panel that IFMA ran at the Houston headquarters, sustainability was the #1 trend, and it had been like number 3 or 4 in the previous panel. In 2010, it was #1. It's still very important, but I'm not sure it rises into the kind of the very top tier. And the reason for that is that it has now become more normalized, I think, as just a part of routine business. I mean, there's still work to do, obviously, but it's become much more normalized in the day-to-day operations at this point, I think. But there's still a recognition that sustainability is a real competitive strategy and a competitive differentiator between those who do it well and who don't. And there's roles for FMs to play there. We can, do all the right corporate social responsibility things, but there's also a very pragmatic, kind of traditional who FM is kind of thing, like recommissioning, as an example.
I think as a pool of FM professionals, some of us might be more advanced or working with enlightened leadership in your field. There may be some of us who are struggling on a day-to-day basis to do real basic recycling type programs. But personally, what I see, and I look over the whole global spectrum, is that we're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And most of the time that step back is because there's been a failure with some sort of well-intended venture that was pushing sustainability and it didn't work. But I think there is enough critical mass in an organization such as IFMA and our brother and sister organizations and associations is that we just keep our nose to the ground and just keep pushing this forward. We will prevail. We may not be able to do it in our professional lifetimes, but I think what we're doing adds to the quality of life of everybody, just not the people we work with, our families, but internationally. I mean, clean water in Africa, water here in California. I can attest, I get brown water out of my tap, and I've been sort of surprised that the media here in California has been focusing on all these things that our governor is doing it, but here in the little town I live in the foothills, we've been having water problems for the last 2 years, to the point that we have no more water, that we have to import it, and the water we import is brown. So I think there are a lot of isolated islands, and having the opportunity to share information like this is also an encouragement. Don't give up. You may be in that process of taking a step back right now, or being told to take a step back by your management, but with your knowledge and with all the knowledge available to you in sustainability, you will take 2 steps forward. So in 5 years from now, we'll be 50% more advanced than we are now. And if we can keep doing that, that's a great thing.
Another one we'll just pause on briefly is business continuity planning. Obviously a core FM responsibility, and we're always a part of the response effort, obviously. So our job is be prepared, maintain your systems, and then be ready to perform when you're called upon. And I'm sure that at some point in your career, virtually every one of us have been involved in some sort of a response situation, and they can be energizing, but in the after event, when you go back and do the after action report, so to speak, there's a lot of lessons to learn there, but they can actually be, they're not necessarily desirable events, but they don't have to be unenjoyable events if you're well prepared, and you're organized, and you're resourced.
The key is communications. Pre-communications, during communications, and post-communication. You can have the best canned software, you can have the best consultants come in and prepare a disaster or a business contingency plan for you, but if you don't have the communication, and if you don't sell it to every single employee, you're not going to be successful. I don't know what the numbers are, but 5, 6 years ago when I was working with the financial institution, we went through our business contingency planning because it was regulated. We knew that there would be a certain attrition of staff that we aren't getting through to, that they're coming in here, they're looking for their paycheck, they're going to worry about their work, and they're not really worried about the aftermath. And that was our biggest challenge, is communicating to them, hey, if we don't succeed, you don't succeed.
This is another area similar to what we did with the metrics. I'm really a fan of home growing your business continuity plan. The consultants and all that are great resources to draw on, but I'm not really a fan of outsourcing the development of that plan because they don't know you. You know you. So I would really encourage folks to, get some information that you need, inform yourself and all that, but I think there's an awful lot of value in FMs developing their own plans from the ground up, and in a very, kind of sometimes in a no-frills, very common sense based, what really works for us. And quite frankly, the requirements are a little bit different today than they used to be in some cases, in large measure because of the remote working that goes on and the improved technology. You may not need every capability. If your business plan has not been refreshed in several years, you may not need every capability or the depth of every capability that you're resourcing on a continuing basis in the new environment. So that's another thing to think about.
If you're going to be a successful facility manager in the future, you have to have in your toolkit, you have to become a subject matter expert with technology and how building systems interplay with each other. Sustainability, I think, is a latent ace in the sleeve. It's something that you really should be a subject matter expert on in business continuity. I mean, those are where you can lead and have a significant impact on your company, and it's not the most costly. Most of the time it's low-lying fruit. But those are the things that really will define a facility manager in the future.
So at that, we've pretty much exhausted the first 45 minutes here. So I guess we would, and we talked about some of this in roundabout ways with other slides. The recapitalization of aging buildings and infrastructure, I think that's an important issue too, but one that FMs at the tactical level don't have a whole lot of leverage on. I think our issue there is be prepared, have information, make good business cases, but we don't really, control the ability to go out and move on that. Improving the FM business acumen, I think that's important, and that's an important part of us, obviously, elevating to the C-suite. We talked about that a little bit. I think I would just wrap up here at the end with kind of putting a summary on this, that, essentially this is a whole lot of change that's going on around us. And this idea of the radical connectedness and VUCA, I don't know if everybody knows that acronym, but VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that really is kind of the new business norm. And so there's a lot of changes, new relationships, and new language, shifting our mindset into performance, not just productivity, but performance as well, and then making good, smart investments in human capital and systems capital to develop the capability around us and build a platform. So I think, if we wanted to put it into 3 bullet points, that would be the closing statement. Francis, you want to add anything?
Well, I just hope that we've been able to share some of our experience and knowledge and information with you. Obviously, we're preaching to the choir here. I hope as part of our role is being cheerleaders, not only for the advancement of the profession, but cheerleaders for you. We know how hard the job is sometimes and the challenges that you face, and we just, we do want to encourage you to keep moving forward, and hopefully there's new opportunities that you can expand upon, and then also take a look at your successors and how do we get more qualified, educated, passionate people to fall into your footsteps when you finally decide to take that step out of the arena. So go team go. Really sincerely want to acknowledge and appreciate all the stuff and all the work that you do in facility management.
And I would just second that. What we do is important. It's important to our organizations, and it's important to each one of us, obviously. So continue to grow, continue to develop, invest not only in your organization, but invest in yourself as well. You're part of that equation, and it's kind of a fun time to be an FM, quite frankly. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of newness in the profession, and that's energizing, and it's exciting stuff. So go have some fun with it as well. And all of a sudden, we must have quit. I can't change the slide. But that was it. Do we have any questions?
Okay, we do have currently one question. It says issues with code. How is occupancy calculated?
I'm not sure I understand the question, because there's a number of different ways you can look at occupancy. We actually just recently completed a refresh of our CAPM system, and as a part of that effort, we went back and completely retooled our occupancy database, which we had developed like 10 years ago when we initially put CAPM in place. And our demands and our appetite for that data have increased significantly in the interim. So we went back essentially to square one and reinvented it. And part of what we did is we looked at the various occupancy definitions. There's a BOMA definition, there's an ANSI definition, there's all over the map. We even have a different definition in our local city that we're in. They don't follow any of the others. So, and we track all of those. So I'm not sure if the question is getting at the technical side or the actual utilization side of occupancy, which is something we spend a lot of effort on tracking and managing.
Well, we just rely on our in-house expertise, have a lot of architects and engineers on time, and in addition, we work with the city, whatever the ruling body is in that area.
Okay, great. I have another question. It says, what is the best resource you recommend for keeping up with future workplace trends?
Well, funny you should mention that. If I can grab it here, I would recommend the new IFMA research report, which was just published yesterday. And this is, again, an output from a set of roundtables that were conducted at World Workplace, and there's going to be a set of follow-up sessions at Facility Fusion in April in DC. So I would recommend that report. You can find it on the IFMA website in the IFMA store. I just got an email copy of it yesterday and have scanned it quickly. It's a brand new release, but I think really good information. I would say that there's a lot of information available if you follow blogs and various websites. A lot of the information comes out of that domain as well. I referenced during the discussion the 2012 Workplace Strategy Summit at Cornell University that was a joint venture between Cornell and the IFMA Foundation. Version 2 of that summit is going to occur in June in London at University College of London. And what I really liked about the Cornell summit was it's the only time actually in my experience where practicing FMs have been together with the academic researchers who are doing the really fundamental nitty-gritty research. And you hear about the workplace evolution from a different perspective and at a much different level of detail. It's a really interesting and engaging discourse. I actually, quite frankly, I thought it was the best IFMA event I've ever been to. So I consider this a commercial for the June event. I know London is a bit of a stretch for many of us with our budgets these days and whatnot, but if you're able to do that, I would highly recommend it. If you're interested in that issue and you're working in that domain, I think it's a fundamental, almost an imperative, because that's where you get really the meat of the information.
And if this is too pricey for you as an individual, maybe this is something you can share with your council or your chapters. Maybe this trend report can be part of your presentations.
And quite frankly, one of the things I do is I'm a blogger, so I watch other blogs and stuff, and I see a lot of this information that people are writing about in a number of, articles, magazines, the Journal, and a lot of folks who blog are on this issue. And whenever a report will come out from, any of the big research houses, McKinsey or CBRE or the others, it gets press. So I watch the internet. You get a lot of information that way, and then you have to go personalize it. I would suggest also that the other point is to do your own research. Become a bit of an academic on this issue if it interests you, because the academic literature literally goes back several decades. And what people were writing in 1950 and 1970 is absolutely relevant to our experience today. They were not off the mark at all.
Great. We have another question. It says, can you expand on the difference between productivity versus performance?
I'd have to give that some thought.
Yeah, well,
for productivity, to me, is a matter of metrics, of measuring, where performance is a matter of coming to how it's accomplished and how it meets agreed upon specifications or goals or key performance indexes, however you do that. That's how I would look at it.
I think that's pretty close. I would say essentially the same thing. Productivity is about measuring their production line, so to speak. Performance, in my mind, is more about the quality of the outcome. But if you kind of key on that subject and listen, that's another one where there's more and more language, out there around that issue.
Great. Okay, we have another one. It says, do you see an increase in third-party management performing corporate real estate / FM functions for owners versus in-house corporate real estate?
I don't know if I understand the last part of that question.
Do you think it'll be outsourced more or in-house more is what I'm getting out of the question? Facility management functions.
I don't know if there's any new trends. I think a lot of corporations, I mean, you have what's the word for it? A group of professional service companies that are out selling their programs. And by selling their programs, some of them take over corporate responsibilities for facilities, mailroom, administrative, those sort of things. I think that is going to continue, and I think they're going to keep sharpening their pencil and redefining their plans when they discover what works best and what doesn't. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think there have been some that have gone out and outsourced who are now back in-house. I think it might be based on a philosophical issue at times. It may be a business issue that drives the choice. I think it reflects to you personally in whatever environment that you're in and what culture you're working in. So I wouldn't suggest preference one over the other. I think both models work, and I'm sure there's a hybrid in between.
And I would agree with that. I think, it's what works best for you. But conditions do change, and culture has a large impact on this issue. I know in UK they have something they call total facilities management, and when I look at what they mean by that term, it really amounts, in my mind, in some sense, to a large-scale outsourcing of the basic service functions, so that the in-house FM suite becomes much more about strategic thought and strategic decisions and initiatives, and the tactical implementation is largely outsourced, and the transactional work is largely outsourced. And that model works. Back probably a decade or more ago, I think it was Cordet had a study where they sort of tried to predict the changing business model for FM over time, and especially for global organizations. There's a lot of convergence that went on over time. The deeper it got, the more you went from trying to do everything in every location to doing, having 3 or 4 business partners based on regional centers of excellence, to at the very outside having one business partner that you manage. Actually, I said in a World Workplace presentation several years ago, and I think it was Nokia, although don't hold me to that, but they had an FM organization, an internal FM organization of 12 people that managed something on the order of 80 million square feet of global operations, and they were doing it with 12 people. Well, obviously, they essentially outsourced everything but the strategy, right? And so again, I think it's about what business model is right for you and your individual circumstances. I think at the strategic level, there's a balancing act, and there's a fulcrum on the decision. What's right for you based on who you are right now versus what your competition is doing, because we hit the bottom line pretty significantly, and the more effective and the more efficient we can become with the dollars that we do consume, that it has a direct link to organizational competitiveness. And if I could send one message to FMs on a broad scale, it would be, if you want to increase your value And if you want to increase your visibility within your organizations, then become a thought leader, not for FM, but become a thought leader for your organization and demonstrate your impact on organizational competitiveness. I think sometimes as FMs we get too narrow a focus on kind of the day-to-day, very tactical things, and that's easy to do when you don't have enough money and you don't have enough time, and we're almost always, all of us are in that boat. The more you can get out of that boat and take the very large strategic view and demonstrate that you really impact competitiveness, then I think all the other things that we talk about desiring become easier to attain.
Okay, great. We have two more questions. We're sorry for going over time. We'll try to get through these next two real fast. The next one is finding new talent is proving more and more difficult as we really are looking for Jack and Jills of all trades, which simply isn't as common as it once was. Long ago, people normally did it themselves, not so much anymore. Where can we find people?
Talk to your peers. Use your networks. Work with the foundation in their student degree programs. There may be an opportunity for you to sponsor someone to come over and work for you internationally. That's personally how I would approach it.
I'll tell you that one of the things I like to do, and we've been fairly successful with here at RAND, is we've worked intentionally to develop a talent pipeline, and we've done that from a couple of sources. One of the things we've done is gone to a couple of local universities, and we've developed relationships with some of the professors, and it works in both ways. It benefits both. So we take interns out of those organizations. It gives us an early eye into young talent that's coming up. It gives us an early entree into the talent population, if you will. And quite frankly, we're able to get an early lead on getting the talent that we really want inside the organization. And those, the young folks who come out of the universities with a new degree, yes, they may have in mind a specialization in their career, but they're also very willing to work. They realize that they're at the early part of their career, and they're willing to do a lot of things, and they understand that contributes to their overall value. So I would encourage that. I think the other pathway, and kind of like the universities, trade schools and things like that, kind of depends on what type of talent you're looking for in terms of what domain. But there are a number of pathways. And then to Francis's point, exercise your network.
And I volunteer myself. If you'd like to contact me offline, feel free to do so. I posted a position that the funding was eventually withdrawn, but before the funding was withdrawn, I had 800 applicants for an assistant facility manager position. So there are qualified people, and I interviewed probably 6 to 8 of them. They're out there.
Oh, excellent. Okay, we have one last question. It says, with aging, longer working, and changing population, do you see ergonomic becoming more important with the facilities department?
Well, I think it's important now. I mean, I work closely with our SHE, or Safety, Health, and Environment group, and we have policies and procedures in place. I know that it's the safety and the comfort of our staff is paramount. That's our most important asset, is that person. So that's how we treat it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's the oops, blacked out there. It's the it's not a new issue, and it's not going to go away. It becomes maybe a little bit more important as the workforce continues to age, but it is also important because of the outfitting, if you will, of the workplace that's occurring, and as that changes, those issues become more and more important. So I agree with Francis. I don't think it's anything new, and I don't think it's going to go away. It's all about how you do it in the smartest way possible.
And remember, 75% of us with gray hair are going to be retiring in 5 years. At least that's what the surveys say.
Okay. Great. I want to thank Ken and Francis for presenting for us. You did a great job. It was very interesting. And I want to thank everyone for attending. Everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you.